Hi Rick, this is Sarah Court, and today I'm going to be showing you how I developed my social media, data mining, web app, and API. To summarize everything, I used my personal social media account as a source of data, and my web application and API essentially scrapes the real-time data from my user timeline on Twitter. It stores the scraped data in MongoDB. It posts tweets to my user timeline, and it adds that posted tweet to my data collection. So this presentation is going to highlight the tools and the processes that I've used to create my API, and the video here is going to showcase the functionality of each step. So to start, I've used Python as a programming language, and I incorporated some HTML into that for styling and some minimal function purposes. I've used two different platforms. I was having some issues, but it all worked out in the end. I've used Spider as my data scraping function platform, and I've used Visual Studio Code with the Flask framework or micro framework and app to create my app and deploy my app. And I've used MongoDB in both of those platforms using PyMongo to export my data as a document into the database and collection. As I mentioned, I had used my Twitter timeline. Being able to grab my API keys, my consumer keys, it allowed me to connect to the Twitter API through my developer account, and I used the connection in both Spider and Visual Studio Code to perform the data scraping and other web application functions. And importing the Tweepy module allowed me to use certain functions, to take a look at the variables. I got to explore the data and kind of pick and choose what I wanted to include in my data model. And that's incorporated into my scrape function, which defines the data model, and it does the actual export of each post using the data model. And that essentially is what the document in MongoDB shows up as. So I did a print function towards the beginning of me testing things out and trying to verify my work to ensure that everything was working properly. And this photo here is actually all of one post or one status or tweet. So being able to explore that and using the Twitter API reference page, I could kind of find out what everything is, what it does, how to call it, and this is the model that I came up with. So this is my MongoDB slide. I go into more depth once I get to that part in my demonstration. Essentially, I'm just including photos showing that my scrape function had created my SDM database with the Twitter collection. You'll see that it verified 100 documents showing that it worked, and I've included a snip of a few of those documents for you. Here I've got the code I used for my app. This funky photo at the top is showing the form that I had used for post. You'll see in my app root, it shows my definition for tweet. So I incorporated tweet in my HTML index page as my tweet button on the actual API. Just a little preview of what it looks like for you. I've got my home page with a couple tabs, and when you click on the Twitter tab, this little Twitter part pops up, and that's got the form and the tweet button that posts the status and exports the status into the Twitter MongoDB collection. So as I previously mentioned, I've used Spider to perform the functions in the first half of my app. This is where the data scraping happens, pulling all the tweets from my user timeline. So I've imported TweePy and PyMongo and Mongo Client from PyMongo. To start, I will show you at this time there is no database or collection of tweets yet. I've input the names for my database as SDM, and you can see that's not here. And the collection is just going to be called Twitter, and you can see also that's not here. So after getting my developer account on Twitter, I could finally view my consumer key and secret, the access token, and token secret, and I was able to use those as my OAuth handler so that I could access my account from my app. So the first things first, I wanted to check my connection. So I have a print function here that it's just going to print my screen name. And you'll see it come up here in my terminal. I've got all my hockey emojis and my screen name. So that's perfect. So now that we're definitely connected to the Twitter API, this is where I've set up my scraping function. So this time I don't have it set to my user name. I have it set to my user timeline. You'll see my user ID, my handle is slcourt, and I've limited it to 100 tweets. So you'll see I've defined scrape. I've got my column set function and my empty tweets list. So for every status that's in my tweets, it's going to post the document to MongoDB using my data model here. You'll see I've got my ID, the time it's created at, the text of the tweet, if it's a quote status or if it's retweeted, and the count of retweet, the count of favorite for that tweet, and any entities associated with the tweets, like links or GIFs, videos, pictures. And for every time the key is run to pull a single tweet, it adds that tweet to the empty tweets list. I've got some other print functions that I had used earlier on in the development process just to verify things were working properly at that time, but with the other stuff added in, they don't function. I just wanted to leave them in there in case I decide to do, another project like this in the future. So my MongoDB is connected. I've got my URI. You'll see my database is SDM. So it returns the database, and then for every post, it adds it. Takes from my Twitter list and then adds it to my MongoDB. So I will do this. I'll enable the scrape function. I'll show you how that works. Into my MongoDB. There we go. So now you'll see it's created my SDM database and the Twitter collection with it. You'll see 100 documents containing all the fun stuff. So it shows you, like hashtags, symbols used, URLs, what type of entity. It even shows the little emojis. Here in Visual Studio, I've got my app.py. You'll see I have also imported TweePy again. I've imported app, and I've used Flask. and PyMongo. First things first, I created my HTML style code for my web application. So, I've got my grid container and placement. I've got my body style, my color style, and I've got some functions in here as well in the body section. I have my page laid out with tabs, and you'll see what I mean once we get to actually viewing the web app. But I have it so that when you click a tab, that tab opens, and there's a button box as well, and that's on the Twitter tab. It has the form to submit the tweet I want to post. Once that button is clicked, that's what's going to activate the function of the tweet being posted to my Twitter account and also to my MongoDB collection. So I've imported TweetPy app and Flask, a bunch of Flask functions, as well as PyMongo. And I've configured my web app here. I've got my SDM database and the URI listed here again, and my Twitter API credentials again. So I've got my routes set up so that my index page shows at all times. It is technically one page, but it has tabs. So I didn't want anything to redirect me anywhere. So I call the index.html that I had just gone over with you. And this route here defines tweet. If there was any get function, basically it just shows you the page. To post, it's called in my index. You'll see here the form shows the URL for tweet and post. Specifically when you click the button on my API to submit the input. So when that button is clicked, it sends a message to this app route. It essentially posts my status to my account through API update status. It also inserts that tweet to my MongoDB Twitter collection in the SDM database. So here we'll make sure everything is saved. I will run the app.py. You'll see the terminal doing its work down here. And it should return me a link. So clicking on my link brings you to my social media web app. This is the home page. It starts off, would you like to make a post? Click on the Twitter tab to get started. So you hover, you'll see it's the Twitter tab, and it brings up the Twitter form. And I mentioned that in my index.html file, as part of the formatting, I included a button box. So that's this part that's surrounding the form and the button. And Twitter's thing is what's happening. So I included that. Now, I don't want my followers to be suspicious. So I've got to use my regular hashtags here to make my tweet. Because I primarily use Twitter only to communicate with other Leafs fans. I hope Willie has another good game tonight. And I'll include Neanderthal. So we click tweet, brings us back to the main index tab or page. Go to my Twitter page, refresh, and there it is. I hope Willie has another good game tonight. Hashtag Neanderthal. We'll check MongoDB. says 101. Go to the end. And there it is. So there you have it. I have a functioning social media, data scraping, and posting web app. Thank you for watching and thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed.